Welcome to New Atlas Live. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me as always is Angelo Giuliano, and popping in as a special guest is Danny Haiphong. How are you gentlemen doing this evening for Angelo and I, and early in the morning for Danny all the way in New York? How's it going? How are you guys doing?
Good. Great to be here.
Great. Nice to have Danny. So, I hope we can get you more often on the show.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes,
I look forward to it.
Yes, I think each weekend, friends of the show, I'll just put an open invitation out there. We do roundtables like what we used to do with Gonzalo Lira, and just kind of get that going. And it's just a way to interact with the audience, do questions and answers, and talk about topics and bounce ideas off one another. And we got quite a lot to talk about, as a matter of fact. I was thinking about doing an update on the situation in Ukraine, but I think I will just do a separate video on that. We got too much other things to talk about. Before we start talking about the opening shots of the Trump administration, I wanted to go over a debate, if you could even call it that, with a billionaire arms manufacturer, online. On X, I recently posted a video about Anduril and the founder, Palmer Luckey. And I was talking about how he's lying about the threat China poses to the United States. He's provoking war with China to sell weapons, to take American taxpayer dollars away from Americans, away from the United States, put it into weapons and point them at China overseas to create a problem overseas rather than taking care of America. So what does he say in response to this? He says, I'm a greater threat to the American way of life than China, but he's actually just jealous of my hair. And then further down, he called me a retard. This is a billionaire who receives hundreds of millions of dollars each year from the US government, your tax dollars, if you're an American. He's taking that money, and this is the mindset he has. This is how he feels when other Americans, I'm an American, ask him questions about what his company is doing with those tax dollars. I just want to bounce it off both of you. Are you even familiar with Anduril and what they're doing? Have you heard of this guy, Palmer Luckey? And I'm talking about him because he's one of what people like to call a tech bro, and we're seeing a larger and larger role played by these type of startups, these type of companies. Elon Musk is kind of a much further along version of Palmer Luckey. Angela, have you ever heard of Anduril? And Danny, I'd like to ask you this as well.
No, I haven't. I'd be actually curious to know if he's like the other weapon manufacturer, funding those think tanks that are actually used by US politicians as guideline for their policies. That would be an interesting question to ask. Is he involved into this financing of the policies? Because they are the ones actually partly doing the policies when it comes to geopolitical agenda.
Yes, Danny, any thoughts on this? Do you know this guy?
I do not. It was so interesting to see that, Brian, when you covered this, because it was the first time I had heard of this particular corporation. But when all of this happened and you showed his reaction and how he was so keenly interested in your analysis, it wasn't a surprise, because this kind of boon, this kind of grift that these military contractors play, they don't like dissent. They don't like being challenged. And we see this with even the biggest of the arms contractors. As Angelo said, they are deep into the think tank world and even into the narrative world, into pouring millions upon millions of dollars into think tanks that have as their primary role the propaganda war necessary to justify their ongoing arms production. For example, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute is replete with money from Raytheon and other arms manufacturers. And all they do is talk about how terrible China is. And this sounds very familiar when it comes to Paul Rolucky, who is doing the exact same thing in order to justify his own business model. So it was not shocking, but it was a bit of a surprise to see him go after you and take so much personally an offense to your fact-based analysis.
Just to tell you, of all of the people that I've gone after, or I was almost certain if anyone were to respond, it would be him, because I've been following his company and him for a while, and he is one of the most insecure, sensitive, easily riled billionaire I think I've ever come across. And again, these are the people who are, if not driving foreign policy, the much larger corporations definitely are. And every moment he gets in front of a camera, he is promoting war with China. And he has actually gone to Taiwan to sell weapons to the administration there, despite America's own one China policy agreement with Beijing and international law recognizing Taiwan as part of China. That is a provocation of war. He is putting America in danger. People like him, companies like that, are putting America in danger. They're not just parasitically feeding off of the American taxpayers. They are denying them infrastructure at home. They're also putting everybody in danger. And I think maybe this is what we can shift toward in this conversation. What is America doing? And people are saying it's Trump, but we started to see this actually happen under the Biden administration. There is a panic taking hold. The conflict in Ukraine is going very poorly for the US, its European proxies, and the rise of China is accelerating. It's not just rising, it is accelerating in its rise. And there is a panic. People may or may not have heard the news. Have either one of you seen this about DeepSeek? It is basically the Chinese version of OpenAI chat GPT. It's basically an AI chatbot that you ask questions and it gives you answers. And it's surpassing OpenAI and their model. Have you guys heard about this? We'll go with Danny first and then Angelo.
Yes, I actually downloaded it right after I heard about it because I wanted to see what all the buzz was about. And it is very fast. And I use ChatGPT. And ChatGPT actually is just rife with so many problems. Slow service. It often goes down offline. There's a lot of problems with the ChatGPT application, and DeepSeek appears to be causing a lot of stir because it corrects these problems, and it corrects these problems in an industry which the United States, the Donald Trump administration, recently announced it's going to pour $500 billion or so dollars. Of course, we have to take a pause and say, well, over how many years, into what? Because usually when that amount of money is poured into anything in the United States, it ends up in private coffers and doesn't really go into any kind of investment. But China never really has to announce these kind of things. They don't talk about, well, we are pouring this amount of billions of yuan or UN into this or that industry. What they're mostly interested in is just building the industry, developing it, spending whatever it takes, and then coming out with the innovations and the models like DeepSeek that is now so shocking. And it's always so shocking, right? Because the Economist and other publications are just losing their minds over this. They don't understand how this happens because they constantly parade and promote the narrative that China is collapsing. China is collapsing. But yet every time they say this, it isn't too long when China then releases the next innovation, when it comes out with that 6th generation fighter jet, when it comes out with the news that it has 47,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. It goes on and on and on. And of course, we saw with Xiaohongshu, the app, the Chinese app that millions of Americans flocked to after the TikTok ban. Now millions of Americans know this, and it's becoming a lot more difficult to continue on this narrative. But what is America doing? You said in the beginning, Brian, well, under Trump, the United States is in a very, I think what we are seeing is a very strategically weak position. The Trump administration wants to pivot back to the West, go back to Monero Doctrine, manifest destiny like policy. And I believe, while on the one hand, this is going to be dangerous, this is going to cause a lot of suffering, likely for people in the Western Hemisphere. It does really reek of an admission of defeat, especially to the rising powers of the East, because, and I've been saying this to people, it's like, okay, yes, Syria fell, Gaza's been a catastrophe, West Asia was lit on fire, but truthfully, the United States isn't able to hold on to anything right now. DeepSeek is a big part of this phenomenon where the United States is just losing ground everywhere. And now you have a Trump administration, which, mind you, I believe he's going to continue on this U.S. power projection, great power competition, strategic competition, confrontation with Russia and China over these 4 years. But right now, I believe there's a strategic decision amongst the elites where they have to take a pause because they have been so utterly, I think, bamboozled and outmaneuvered and ultimately defeated in their immediate ends.
Angelo, anything you want to add about that?
Well, on this project, AI project in the US, this is a typical project where Trump is coming with this envelope of $500 billion. Basically, usually what happens is that it's the opposite that should happen. You should come up with a project. It has a cost. It has actually a stream of revenues. I mean, there's an initial investment, so cash outflow, and then you project the revenues over time, and that gives you what we call net present value. Is it viable or not? Those are studies that you need to do before. What happens here is that Trump is coming and he's going to his friends, because those are his friends, and he's saying, I have this envelope and we are going to share this envelope. And I wouldn't be surprised that Trump might become the new big guy. Who I refer to, Hunter Biden had the big guy. And I think somehow, there's going to be, the corruption will stay. So they have this money and they are going to find a way to spend it on AI. While China is very different. First of all, there's a long-term vision, and it's a purpose-based, very much purpose-based. Why do we need AI, and what is it for? Here, it is going to benefit the oligarch, and there's going to be lots of waste because you receive the money. I've been on the side of investing and receiving funds in my activities. When you receive money, you are kind of forced to spend it. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be spent efficiently. While in China, they are extremely careful. There's no waste, absolutely no waste. If you go to an office, for example, in China, it's not going to be lavish because they are very careful about how they use the money. And even at the government level, it's not because it's the government that are not careful. On the contrary, they need to be accountable. There is no waste, and there's planification. So when you do a project like this, they come back to you and after 5 years and they say, okay, did you deliver? And is it profitable or not? If it's not, well, you're not in the right position and we don't need you.
So I just want to build on something both of you were getting at. First, Danny says everyone is shocked. They're only shocked because they're not paying attention to what's going on in China. They're only shocked because they listen only to the Western media that tells them that in China, everybody is in a giant prison camp, a 1.4 billion populated prison camp. They're all riding on bicycles. People picture China all the way back in the 60s and 70s. And they think that's what China still looks like today. Angelo lives in China. Danny, you've gone to China. I've been to China. I live here in Asia. And it simply is not like that. If you're familiar with where China really is, the progress, the breakneck pace, the progress is taking place at, you wouldn't be surprised at all to find out that they have something that can rival OpenAI or any of America's best technology. I think, Danny, you talked about 6th generation warplanes, and I saw someone in the comment section talk about reusable rockets. They're actually already working on prototypes that are flying that will operate like SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket system. And give credit where credit is due. That is an amazing system. It is the only one in the world right now that can do what it does. It has revolutionized spaceflight. But as Angelo was pointing out, there is this priority in the West, profit over purpose, whereas in China it is purpose over profit. We could see how those dynamics have also affected military industrial output between Russia and all of the collective West. We could see what a big difference these two different systems have between each other, how one is effective at creating huge amounts of profit and power for a very small handful of people, and the others at advancing technology for everybody. One other thing before we switch to another topic, I saw people talking about DeepSeek, again, tech bros in the West complaining, they're lying about how cheap it costs, and they're trying to just put us out of competition by basically what is it called when you're like dumping and making the price artificially low. No, it actually costs that much, just like big pharma costs pennies to make, and these people are charging you hundreds, sometimes thousands of times more than what it actually costs to make, because it's a monopoly. They control the information space. They can tell you anything that they want, and you will believe it because there is no alternative. Now there is an alternative. It is China, and this is why the collective West, whether it's Biden or Trump or anyone else, this is why they are desperately trying to stop China. And I guess that is what we're going to start talking about next. Ultimately, I just want to show people some headlines here. I want to show you guys some headlines. Hold on, let me find the first one here. Okay. So did anyone see this news story over the last week? The U.S. sending troops to the border. U.S. troops to the border. There was spectacular footage of Marine Corps Osprey transport aircraft, tilt rotor aircraft, landing Marines in the middle of wherever, and it was a production. It was a production. People almost surely saw that, and we saw all about Trump pausing, freezing, claiming he's going to slash foreign aid programs. We also saw him talk about, nope, that's the wrong one. This one, talking about how he's going to declassify secret documents related to, or classified documents related to JFK, his assassination. Now, all of these articles that I just showed you on the screen, yes, these were news stories from this week, but each one of these articles was from his first term in office. The point I'm trying to make here, this one is from 2018. Let's see, this one right here, 2018. This one, 2020. The point I'm trying to make is he literally did every single one of these stunts the first time he was in office. And in reality, he didn't actually do any of this. Yes, he sent troops to the border, but it did not secure the border. It did nothing to secure the border, did nothing to address the root cause of the problem. Yes, he swore he was going to slash foreign aid programs, but they just continued. As a matter of fact, do we remember when the Trump administration did this? Ending the CIA arms program for the rebels. But even though he officially ended it, it continued, because eventually this program resulted in the overthrow of the Syrian government. That was just at the end of last year. So and then declassifying the documents related to JFK. He said he was going to do it. He put it up for review, and the CIA said, no, we can't declassify it. So that was it. That was the end of it. Each one of these stunts pandered to his support base. This was from his first term in office. It fired up his base, as the headline suggests, but it didn't solve anything. And one last thing I'm going to say before I hand it over to both of you is, I've talked to Trump supporters who honestly believe that the immigration problem was solved during his last administration. It actually got worse after he deployed the troops. And then it got even worse after that, after his administration was over. Before it was actually a little bit more under control under Obama. But Trump supporters, because they only consume pro-Trump media, just like Biden supporters only consume pro-Biden media, they were thoroughly convinced that it was the best time in terms of recent history, in terms of immigration. So what I'm trying to lay out here is that he's doing this again. And people are buying into it again because they don't even remember what he actually did during his first term in office. Maybe start with Angelo and then Danny.
Well, I see a lot of cosmetics here and there, and especially when it comes to societal. Of course, the Biden administration was very ideological, and I think this is the main difference. One is ideological, and he is more into like he's more into money, you know. It's actually it's a straight talk, you know. It can be more rough. But ultimately, it's cosmetic. Here, I have the impression this is a shift between oligarch. There's an internal fights between maybe globalist oligarch and American oligarch, and that might be the only shift. But ultimately, the power is in the same hand of the elites. And I would say when it comes to corruption, I would say that Hunter Biden, the Biden, they look like amateurs. Just think for 1 second, just one day before the inauguration, he made billions of dollars on doing a meme, what we call shitcoin. I mean, basically it's a scam. It's just a scam where he's making billions of dollars. What is the image is bringing to this MAGA? What is to do with MAGA? And I would say, and I'm the first one to criticize, even though I was kind of happy. I mean, we needed a change somehow, you know, from Biden. And, you know, somehow, you know, I think it was a minor evil to have Trump. But now I would say to the MAGA people, well, you need to make him accountable. And whenever he does things like this, if you don't call him up, you become part of a cult, because that's a cult. The danger we have is that you give a blank check and he does whatever he wants. Now, I'm going to give you another example. Gaza, there's a project. He said these days that Gaza, there should be like a real estate project there. And actually now he's pushing more towards, you know, displacement of people in Gaza to Jordania and to Egypt. Well, you know who's heavily invested into those real estate projects is Jared Kushner, his son-in-law. So I would say that this is corruption on steroids. I mean, the Biden, they look like really amateur. So I would, you know, I'm okay if you are pro, you know, whoever is pro MAGA. I get that, you know, that's your opinion. But at least be honest. Don't be like just, I mean, brainless a cult supporter. You know, you need to call him up on what he's doing. And the signs, he's been in power for 10 days. I mean, it hasn't been much time. But this is all about, you know, making himself rich and making his friends rich too, you know, because this AI project of $500 billion, that is obvious. This is going to go to his friends. And in addition to that, he's announcing that, you know, he's making some allusions that, well, maybe TikTok could go to Elon. Who's Elon? That's your friend. Yeah, I mean, this is all, you know, a grab of
cartoonish.
Power.
Yes.
It's cartoonish, but you call him up. I'm okay. You are for pro MAGA, but you're a cult member if you don't call him up.
Danny, you're in the United States. Was the immigration problem? We can debate what the actual problem even is. Did it miraculously improve during the Trump administration? And then as soon as he was out of office, like the minute his foot stepped out the door, they all came flooding back in? Or am I confused? Did I miss something? Danny?
Well, what we are finding, and I think this is true on both sides of the political aisle in the United States, is that it is primarily narrative driven, it is primarily spin driven, and that the majority of people who end up pledging their devoted support to either the GOP, if we want to call it the MAGA side, or the opposite side, the Democratic Party side, that is where a lot of the support comes from. It's not an expectation that anything is going to change. It's not an expectation that these promises are actually worthwhile or that they're even going to be paid attention to once their preferred candidate is in office. It really is about which narrative, what you like to hear most, what you like to be told, and then business as usual continues. So with the immigration issue, the big issue here is that the United States has a completely unhinged interventionist policy, and it relies actually upon these massive corporations here in the U.S. They rely upon the cheapest of the least protected labor, these so-called migrants, in order to do exactly what we've all been talking about, profit over purpose, right? It's all about making as much money as possible. And this includes the securitization and militarization of that US-Mexico border, which is nothing new. I mean, this has been going on since arguably the early 20th century in the United States, this wave of militarization of the border as a political issue to stir up people's anger and fears, and then send a lot of money to these same military contractors who want to use that very porous border as a way to dump their weapons and technology. So there's whole in Arizona and other states along the U.S.-Mexico border, there are weapons expos. It's a very lucrative industry, and it's part of U.S. foreign policy in a lot of ways, as Mexico has always been. So in effect, this immigration problem is never actually addressed, because if it is going to be truly addressed, then what actually has to happen is there has to be a complete shift in what the United States considers to be citizenship versus non-citizenship. There's to be a complete shift in U.S. foreign policy, and there needs to be a demilitarization of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. policy as a whole, especially after the conditions that allow that to happen are created. So ending endless wars that the United States wages abroad, especially its dirty wars, still ongoing in Latin America. And I believe under Trump, they're going to get worse, because we already see that the Trump administration, as most Republican administrations do, are looking back to pivot to this Monero doctrine and try to pick on what they believe are weaker countries. And I believe that might actually happen even more so early on in the Trump administration, because I believe that Donald Trump and the people around him know that if they adopt a similar policy, especially in the first year of his administration, to Biden, this Cold War orientation, they will suffer embarrassing defeats like the Biden administration did in Ukraine, and that will spell disaster for the midterm election. So a lot of this is about reinforcing the very flimsy and fragile legitimacy of the current administration, which came riding in with all this momentum, mostly because the Biden administration ended so badly. I mean, the Biden administration was ousted because of Gaza. I mean, all the polls are coming out that the embarrassment of allowing Israel to kill all of these Palestinians, tens of thousands of Palestinians, everyone had access to seeing what was happening there. And the Biden administration, all Joe Biden could say was, well, we support Israel until the last day, the first day until the last day. That's all he could say. And people got disgusted by it. And so they didn't vote for him. And so the Trump administration walked in easily, more easier than I believe the Trump administration was even, that Donald Trump was even expecting, because not only is the U.S. economy very shaky, fragile, costs are incredibly high, and it's not talked about. The U.S. economy right now is seen as a juggernaut. That's what the U.S. media says, but that's a complete detachment from how ordinary people are living. And then you have the Gaza situation. It was game over for Joe Biden. Donald Trump really didn't have to do that much to win. The fact that he won by so much is because in the last months of his campaign, he took advantage of this by trying to hit on all these points that you've been talking about, Brian. He hit on immigration, he hit on Ukraine, he even hit on Gaza, and he even campaigned in parts of the United States where that issue is very much critical, for example, in Arab and Muslim communities in Michigan. So Donald Trump was very smart in this one. We have to give credit where credit is due. Donald Trump ran a very smart campaign, especially in the last months. But now that he's in office, a lot of this is political theater. It's the, 100, 200, 300 executive orders. It's political theater acts meant to further the legitimacy that he wrote in on. But truthfully, we are going to see, as what you always call about continuity of agenda, we're going to see these wars that cause mass migration continue. We're going to see the U.S. military, the U.S. Foreign policy regime. It's not going to change just because Donald Trump is here. The best we are going to get, especially in the first few months, is simply a reorientation, which possibly and probably will be mostly surface level and on the face level. It won't be a categorical change. We see this in Ukraine right now. Look at the plan that the Trump administration is promoting and saying, Russia, you have to take this. Russia isn't even going to look at this. They've already seen it. They can read the newspapers. Russians can read. Putin can read. They all can read. They don't need to even talk to Donald Trump to say this is not what we are even going to begin a discussion about. A freeze of the conflict, a ceasefire in the middle of a conflict that Russia is obviously winning. So a lot of this is going to be theater. I don't believe we're going to see massive changes right away. The best I think we're going to see, and I use that word best only in terms of the reality of change, not that it will be good for anybody, but I believe that we'll see in the first couple months, Greenland, saber rattling, tariffs, these will be concrete policies, but they're not going to resolve anything. Actually, they might create new problems for the United States and possibly further outstretch its empire, and then I believe possibly backfire mightily when the U.S. foreign policy regime has to shift back to what its actual priorities are. Greenland is not really an actual priority from the standpoint of will this make a strategic difference in its overall objective to contain Russia, China, and to dominate the world. It can play a role in that. It's a possible chip in that, but it's a very minor one. And that's why there isn't this really wasn't a major discussion prior to the Trump administration deciding that it should be.
A lot of good points there, Danny. I just want to go back to, we remember Trump during the campaign talking about a peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians. Now that he's president, do you think he's working hard to cement that ceasefire, peace in the Middle East? This is literally what he did. 2,000-pound bombs on the way to Israel. They were paused under Biden. Again, theatrics, narrative, theater. They were always arming Israel all along. They could not conduct military operations without constant supply of munitions from the United States. And now Trump is going to send these bombs. For what purpose? To drop them on people. That's the purpose of a bomb, especially an Israeli bomb. That is what they will use them for. And so this had nothing to do with actual peace. Again, it was pandering to the people, like all politicians, lying to them, telling them what they want to hear. And then once they're in office, doing what special interests want them to do. You said something else, Danny. You were talking about big corporations and how they drive policy in the context of wanting cheap labor in the form of illegal immigrants. And that reminds me of another point I want to make. The corporations driving foreign policy have not changed. So why would the policy of a president in the White House change? I heard people say, oh, Brian, he has, I was just talking to someone on X just today, that he has to pick neocons or he can't get them through confirmation because, that the special interests are only going to give a green light to neocons. If they're only going to give a green light to a neocon at a confirmation hearing, don't you think they're only going to green light policy that serves their interests? They know the answer. They just don't want to admit it. They want to believe that change is coming in the form of just voting once every 4 years, but it isn't. And this is what we're trying to tell people. Danny, you also talked, and Angelo and I talked about this in a previous live stream, Greenland and Panama. If you actually think about it, the whole purpose of Greenland is to expand confrontation with Russia. The whole point of Panama, and Trump himself said this, is to confront China. It's to, China has ports in Panama. It has nothing to do with the canal. They're on both sides of the canal. They have nothing to do with the canal themselves. The whole point is to cut the Panama Canal off from China as part of a wider, and we've been talking about this for years, a maritime blockade of all Chinese shipping worldwide, because this is the end game. They realize if China surpasses the US, it is irreversible. It will never be undone. So they need to act now. And they have the perfect person to sell this to the American people in the form of President Trump. And I saw Carl Zah is in the comment section. Maybe if he wants to jump in later, he can. I don't know. We'll see. Let's see. Let's think about the freezing of the foreign aids, because I saw a lot of people talking about this. The Pentagon said arms are still going to Ukraine, so I really don't know what people are talking about. And again, he publicly ended the program to arm the terrorists in Syria, but that continued anyway, obviously. So, Angelo, Danny, what do you think he's doing with all? Well, I mean, it's obviously theater, but from your point of view, where do you think this is all headed? Is this just, and this is what I think, is this just to make people think that the U.S. tried diplomacy before it failed, and then they were forced to continue hostilities, confrontation, and military buildup, or what? Who went first last time? I don't remember. Danny is our guest. We'll let Danny go. Danny, go ahead.
Well, in my estimation, there are two things happening. There's the erraticism of Donald Trump. There's the inconsistency of Donald Trump. There's the ultimate political continuity of Trump with the establishment, which people don't like to talk about. But let's be quite honest. We've seen the Trump administration. We've seen Donald Trump before as president. And let's just say when there were aspects of foreign policy, for example, that went against his agenda, it's not like he was protesting. I mean, this is often something that we have problems with in the United States around the Democratic Party and the so-called left. A lot of people will make the same kind of excuses. Oh, well, you kind of have to play the game. You kind of have to just, of course, what are they going to do? Well, at the very least, you could protest. But in the first Trump administration, when relations were getting worse with Russia, when we were on the brink of war in 2020 with Iran, when Syria fell through, when Afghanistan fell through, Donald Trump wasn't really protesting, sounding the alarm, saying, look at what they're doing to me. No, that didn't happen. Actually, it just went along mainly in the quiet. So there's that. But also, in my opinion, right now, there is, I believe, a crisis in the U.S. empire's capacity to project power. So Donald Trump being in office is quite a problem in the sense that at the very least, what Donald Trump can do and will try to do for the sake of his own legitimacy is to reshift the priorities on the surface level to promote a different kind of way of projecting power and empire, which could have policy impact, especially since there really isn't an appetite for the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, for example, across the political aisle. So that's why we see the executive order around foreign aid, which you're exactly right, Brian. It doesn't impact, at least this is what we don't actually know what's happening in the background. There's a lot that information we don't get about how these kind of policies, executive orders are implemented. In fact, a lot of them, we are told something is happening. For example, the Obama administration put in a slew of executive orders under every time the National Defense Authorization Act was signed. And then only later did we find that some of those things had, for example, a kill list along with them, these very dangerous and war criminal policies that nobody asked for. And nobody even got to be told until it was leaked to them by WikiLeaks or some other source. So we don't actually know how this is going to be implemented. But given the reaction in Ukraine, given the way the silence and the relative lack of panic on the side of those who are so invested in the conflict in Ukraine, it's likely that this is actually just affecting, for a very temporary period, everything around military assistance to Ukraine, the NGOs, the aid, all of this, which is significant to a degree because Ukraine is essentially living off of the US and UK trough. But in the end, it's not ending the conflict in Ukraine, because the reality is if the United States actually froze foreign aid, foreign military, especially military aid to Ukraine, the conflict would spiral out of control incredibly fast, because what limited military power Ukraine has left is so dependent upon what the United States has been providing. So, and that is, as you have pointed out so many times in your coverage, Brian, it's so limited in scope and not effective on the battlefield. It's not changing any kind of outcome. But in order for the Ukrainian army even to exist right now, it needs whatever it can get. So, in my opinion, this is far more about what Donald Trump, and you can see his supporters and his handlers and all of this are saying. They're saying, well, Biden didn't fulfill any of his promises, but Trump is fulfilling all of them. What we're really going to find, I believe, in the oncoming weeks and months is that a lot of these fulfilled promises are going to be very minute, surface level, subject to reversal. And especially in regards to Ukraine, I think this is the key one, because this issue, in my opinion, is the issue for Donald Trump. The Gaza, West Asia, I believe all of that is incidental in the sense that Trump really had to do something about that. He could not come into office with an active genocide happening, because it would become his genocide. He even said, it's not our war. He wants to promote this idea that Israel and the West Asia, they're kind of this like hopeless place that the United States doesn't really have any role. And he needs to do that for narrative. We've already seen, though, how Trump is giving a lot of gifts to Israel in order to what I believe eventually will be the ongoing continuation of the overall project, which really hasn't stopped. We see what's happening in the West Bank. We are going to, Israel is not going to stop. So that is going to happen again. It's only a matter of time before that explodes. But Ukraine, this issue, if he does not come up with some kind of legitimate political settlement to this conflict that he can take credit for, it's going to be a disaster for his administration. And I don't believe he can do it, because we already see the plan that he's promoting. It is not a plan that Russia is willing to listen to. The U.S. political and foreign policy establishment will never allow the United States to cede anything to Russia, which means the Trump administration, even if it wanted to, even if Donald Trump was like, yes, I want to come up with a legitimate negotiation with Russia that will end up in some kind of settlement, he can't even do this. And it's not clear, and I don't believe it's real, that he wants to do this. It seems like what he would want is for this conflict to be delayed so he can get out of Dodge before it explodes again. Russia will never accept this, and this means that we are likely going to see a very long process, which will eat away, in my opinion, at his legitimacy, whether his followers, whether his supporters, whether those who are looking at the Trump administration right now will cede to that. But that seems to be the case. Unless Russia, I could be wrong, unless Russia is just ready to pause this thing, I don't see it. I actually see more so that if any kind of talks happen, they will happen. I believe that there will be conversations between Russia and the United States over the coming weeks and months. But do I see them coming up with anything fruitful? No. And to me, this is the direction that the Trump administration is heading. The actual condition, the actual position of the United States as an empire is not reversed by by one person who says he has all of these grand ideas, but in reality is partaking in the same political theater, in the same political system, alongside the same establishment and the same interests, corporate, military, etc., that produce these policies and produce this desire and overall orientation toward full spectrum dominance in the first place.
Yes, and look, the conflict in Ukraine is spiraling out of control anyway. Do people remember during the Biden administration, there was like half a year where no weapons were being sent to Ukraine? Do people remember that? The funding was cut for months and months because the Republicans wouldn't approve of it. And yet somehow Ukraine was still getting weapons and ammunition from somewhere. They were getting it from somewhere, and they were still able to continue fighting on. So there's a lot of ways to make it look like, oh, I'm doing something about this. People have to remember, it was during his administration that the U.S. openly began arming Ukraine in the first place. Again, this was almost certainly the red line that was crossed that precipitated the conflict in the first place. And one more thing I want to say before I hand it over to Angelo is that if Trump was serious about ending the war in Ukraine, he would admit the reason why it was being fought in the first place, NATO expansion up to Russia's border. And if he, for some reason, felt like he couldn't do that, he's got all of this influence. He has all of this media behind him. They could have done it. They could have started putting this narrative into the heads of Americans. This excuse that the deep state wants it to be this way, everyone thinks it's this way. He has the power to convince people otherwise, and he's not using it. Because in reality, this isn't about changing U.S. foreign policy. This is about putting MAGA branding on it, just like Biden put whatever his branding was. I don't know what you would call his branding, but whatever it was, Democrats, maybe liberal, I don't know. Angelo, what do you want to say? What do you think about this conflict in Ukraine? I think if it was Harris, the same thing would be happening. They need to end it, because if they don't end it, the Ukrainian military is going to collapse.
Yeah, well, just to go back to the point of the aid, I think we're talking about the USAID mainly. That aid, which is, by the way, the last 2 years, they spent 30 billions on USAID. And I would say this might be actually closely related to the link with the Democrats, with the Biden administration, that corruption. Remember, they didn't want to audit that. And there's a reason behind that, because there's a huge corruption behind this. So I would say that it'd rather be the one controlling that corruption in a sense that if maybe a shift, that you might actually revisit what's being done. And keep in mind that it's also very much linked to the Soros gang, which are frontal enemies of Trump. So I would say this is probably internal politics, and it's related to that corruption, that he'd rather actually take his share. He will be the new big guy when it comes to the corruption in Ukraine. And I think this is it is existential for Russia, and we know what Putin wants. He said from day one was extremely clear. It's about the security guarantee for Russia and protecting the Russian population. It was always extremely clear, and it's about revisiting this, this having a new format for security for Europe. But the problem is that Trump cannot come up with a solution that is viable for NATO and for Russia. If they lose, if the US, NATO lose in Ukraine, that means that NATO is going to be a ripple effect to NATO will be over, and it could have a ripple effect to even the existence of the EU. That is extremely important. Imagine if the EU, if that is the end of the existence of the EU, then it's over. Then it's over. What do you do with that? Do you think you can engage into a new confrontation in Southeast Asia? No, it would be impossible. So that is the end. So there's no solution for him. Absolutely no solution. And on the other side, well, it's very clear for Russia. There cannot be any concession. It's existential. Imagine if, let's say, Germany goes into a conflict. I don't know, Poland goes crazy. Well, the other option is nuclear bomb. If it gets to that, Russia has a limited, in terms of, I would say, capacity, in terms of human capacity, it's limited. If it had to actually have a confrontational war with NATO, there would be nuclear, because it's about demography, and so it's existential, and there's no way out of this. So knowing Trump and the ego he has, he will never go into accepting defeat. So there's no way out. I don't see any way out of this. And I agree with Danny. This is it's just cosmetic. Just going back to actually when it comes to Israel, the strategy there is to stop the massacre, but to let it rot, Now you have all this population, they're moving from the south of Gaza to the northern Gaza, but there's nothing there. They are going to slowly starve and die. And they're going to make the situation rot. And now you see the Zionist regime is actually shifting towards the West Bank. And they're starting to bomb the West Bank, do random killing, and they're pushing for an uprising there. So there is a project of complete annihilation of the Palestinian population. Now with Trump, it's going to be about a break. So Trump is basically saying, well, we are going to have this real estate project. Well, let's just give me a break because I cannot have multiple fronts. So I don't see any way out. And we see that those long-term projects, it's all confrontational. And there's a dilemma too, MAGA is about reindustrialization of the US. So it means tariffs. It means there's also, stop illegal, sending back all the illegal immigrants. But it's going to be high inflation. What do you do? Especially in this economy where, you have average Joe that has less disposable income. I mean, they cannot afford to have high inflation. And when you look at the growth of the US, it's been financialized economy, but in addition, the quality of growth was all money printing. And they know the problem. They are going to use the same problem. Now, $500 billion on AI, where does it come from? That's money printing. It's always this vicious circle. And, it's going to be like more trillions of debt for the next administration. And you hand over the problem to always, it's not, I didn't do it, he did it, and it's just, it's a vicious circle.
Absolutely. And I don't know if people notice, but the few things regarding a solution Trump has alluded to is telling Russia, you need to make a deal or I'm going to put more sanctions on you. I mean, does that sound does that sound familiar to anybody? Isn't that what we just listened to since this all began? So this is why I want, people in America, maybe they don't understand this. I'm overseas. People who support Trump, they're ready to go to sleep for 4 years and pretend everything is okay until the other guy gets in, and then they'll be all up in arms again. I can't afford to do that because in reality, U.S. foreign policy continues destroying the planet no matter who is in the White House, no matter who controls Congress. I don't follow elections. I don't care about elections. I don't care what they say in terms of rhetoric. I can see with my own eyes the U.S. interference continuing unabated, no matter which budgets they claim they cut, what programs they say they froze. It continues. I've seen it. I've been here almost my entire adult life. That is all the U.S. has ever done. So I have an imperative. I want people to wake up, and I want them to question and hold. Angelo, you've been saying about you cannot just give the person you voted for a blank check just because they're doing something opposite of what you thought they would do. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. That means there's something wrong with the guy you voted. Hold him accountable. You didn't do anything wrong. You have nothing to lose or feel ashamed of by admitting that they're not upholding their campaign promise. Hold them accountable. There's many other things Americans need to do to take their country back, but you can start there, I think. Let's see, what else? China. I want to talk about China. And if people remember at the very beginning of Trump's administration, he was very friendly towards China. Do people remember that? He met with President Xi Jinping and he said all kinds of great things. And he was, in typical Trump style. But over his administration, what did he do? He practically kidnapped the senior, I forget, CEO or
the CFO, I think, of
CFO of Huawei in Canada. He told Canada, arrest her. And so they just snatched her and basically held her hostage. That's what they did. And then under the Trump administration, and it continued unabated under Biden. This is my point. It does not matter who is in office. They started trying to dismantle Huawei. They tried to convince the entire planet to boycott and cut off Huawei and strangle it out of existence. And that is what they've been doing toward TikTok. That is what they're trying to do to Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers. This is what they're trying to do with everything across the board as China begins, because ultimately all of this goes back to China. Even the conflict with Russia goes back to China, because the US, and again, we've talked about this, they envision a blockade on Chinese resources going to China and trade coming from China. But if China shares this long border with Russia, with all the natural resources Russia has, it's going to be very difficult to cut them off from the material support they need to run a war machine if the U.S. provokes a war with China. What do you guys think about that, Danny?
Well, if Donald Trump actually had the stones that he says he has, if he was as tough and as strong as he says he is, then he would actually offer something and change particular policies with which he says, I don't know if you remember, but as he was president-elect, what did he say? The United States and China, we're going to solve the world's problems together. Well, then do it. Do it. You had a phone call with Xi Jinping. You said it was almost an hour long or whatever the length was. Why not? I believe that China would be very open and willing to begin constructive engagement on any kind of problem that you see as something that you can work together on. But we're not seeing that. And I don't believe we are going to see it. Now, we could see Trump go to China, possibly. Seems like a stretch, but we could see it. We could see him meet with President Xi Jinping. We could see that. I don't think it's completely off of the table, especially in the first 100-day kind of whirlwind, as a way to demonstrate exactly what you said, Brian, that the United States is back and into this golden age and is willing to do what it wasn't doing before. But in terms of policies, will we see any change in policy? I double dog dare the Trump administration to actually do that, because the minute he does we will see an explosion of anti-Trump rhetoric, of a complete reversal of how Trump is being treated now, which in the media and by the establishment right now is mainly like, oh yeah, this is kind of weird. This is a little shocking. Maybe this is newsworthy and headline worthy, but it really isn't. Don't do that. Oh, you're so wrong. There isn't any of that right now in the Western media. Actually, the media coverage has been, I believe, mainly favorable, because Donald Trump actually feeds a lot off of media coverage, and in many respects, that's what he's kind of doing here. It's not about any kind of significant changes. It's about getting more attention, building his brand, building his image and his strength and his legitimacy as a political and public figure. That is what he feeds off of. But in terms of actual change of policy toward China or anywhere else in the world, it's going to be either insignificant, nil, or the opposite, which is usually what happens. It will get more aggressive over time. That's what we saw with the Biden administration. That's what we saw with the first Trump administration. That's what we saw with the Obama administration. After a period of playing around with what is supposed to make you legitimate, right? And if with Obama, it was the Middle East. He escalated some places. He tried to de-escalate other places in the first year or so. And it ended up being a wash. And after that, there was a massive escalations everywhere. The Biden administration, a very similar thing. COVID, there was a big crisis. There was this big lull period. Let's get the economy back together. And then boom, you had Ukraine. We had West Asia. All of it ended up being massive escalations on the foreign policy realm. With the Trump administration, we could very well see a very similar thing. If he actually does pivot west, starts to try to bully Greenland into selling to a more significant degree, escalating militarily there, going to Latin America, and fulfilling Marco Rubio's wet dreams about overthrowing all of the governments that he hates, Venezuela, Cuba, etc. If he does that, those are projects that aren't going to be quick either. If he does that, he may very well find himself in multiple quagmires, because, as we've been discussing, Ukraine is not easily resolved, and it's unclear whether he actually wants to. China, this other question, China's rise, that is unresolvable, because you can't really stop that short of a nuclear conflict, which would destroy everything. So we could very well see the Trump administration, by force from the establishment, need to become even more aggressive toward China again in the coming years? And what capacity will what condition will the U.S. empire be in by that time? It's unclear. I believe that the Trump administration is acting in this kind of way because on the one hand, it is looking to promote a certain kind of image, but I also believe on the other, there's some, well, how do we actually navigate a very difficult terrain that I don't believe the U.S. empire really has the capacity to navigate as it once did. Brian, we talk a lot about Syria, and I'll just close on this. Syria was a big loss for humanity as a whole, for the multipolar world, etc. But we don't hear the United States establishment throwing up their hands saying, yes, we got it. We don't hear that. Should have been, if this was 5 to 10 years ago, that would have been a shot in the arm. But because of the condition of West Asia, the situation, the crisis there, it's unmanageable. Syria is really just a welcome. It's a welcome development, but it's one that doesn't really change the overall dynamic. Actually, it could make it a lot worse over time for the ability of the United States to project its power there. So all of this is to say is that the Trump administration really is facing immense challenges. And I don't believe that the Trump administration, Donald Trump himself, has the desire or the capabilities to confront them, contrary to what I think a lot of people are putting their hopes into.
So, Danny, as you were talking about Secretary of State Marco Rubio, to become Secretary of State, he had to leave the board of directors of the International Republican Institute, which is a subsidiary of the National Endowment for Democracy, America's premier regime change agency. So when he's announcing, I'm going to freeze foreign aid programs around the globe, it's not because he's going to stop interfering. This is what he has done his entire political career. And that is in service of special interests. It wasn't a personal choice of his. That is how he was able to get to where he is in the first place, in service of these special interests. He still serves those interests. So all this is a recalibration, a refocus. Danny, you're talking about a hypothetical situation with which Trump could somehow mend ties with China for real. The first thing, again, just like with Russia, the first thing America has to admit is why do we have this conflict with China in the first place? Why is it? It's because of this. This is American foreign policy since forever, since the end of World War II. U.S. strategy plan calls for ensuring no rivals develop. No rival is allowed. China is not allowed to be a peer or near peer competitor. Russia is not allowed. All of these nations must be subordinated to U.S. power. That is literally what it said in the Department of Defense document back in 1992, and that is what they have been building on ever since. There's also another reason why China's rise is particularly unacceptable for the West, and people don't like when I say this, but I don't care because it's true. This headline, look at this headline, because China isn't Caucasian. The U.S. is planning for a clash of civilizations that could be dangerous. And it's not as if this is only Trump and his supporters, Biden and his supporters, everyone in the American foreign policy, everyone across foreign policy and everyone following it and supporting it. This is how they feel. They feel America is exceptional. Americans are superior and China is inferior, and them surpassing the U.S. is unacceptable, almost like a violation of the laws of physics. And so this is why they're almost losing their mind. And one more thing, because I saw someone in the comment section talk about inflation. If Trump puts tariffs on, which is something he began during his first administration, Biden continued unabated, and Trump is going to build on top of all of that. People said there will be massive inflation, and I agree. It's going to create a even bigger cost of living crisis. Danny, you could attest that you're living in the U.S. I have family living in the U.S. I know this is a real problem. Remember TikTok and how the U.S. was trying to ban TikTok, and how people were freaking out, and how a lot of people were losing their livelihood because they made their livelihood on TikTok. That is a microcosm of what is about to come. And people say, well, they won't do it because all of these people are going to suffer. People suffered when they began moving on TikTok. And they will continue moving on TikTok. They're just delaying it. They're stretching it out. So people, if it's like the myth of boiling a frog, throwing it in a boiling water, it'll jump out if you turn up the heat. I don't think that's true, but you get it. You get the metaphor. That's what they're doing with TikTok. And that's what they're doing with the economy. Angelo builds on top of that.
Well, it's I think it's Trump's style. We've seen it before. It's flexing arms. It's having tough talk, but it's also the strategy of carrots and stick. It's a nice talk today. It actually plays, the same person plays the good and bad cop, and it's about confusing people. He comes one day, says, "Oh, we are going to we need to deal with nuclear weapons. We need to denuclearize the world. Because it's not viable." But and then next day he becomes a hawk. That's about confusing people. So I would say, there's a lot of, but he hasn't changed. We've seen it before. It's just a continuation, and I think this is I think it's a defining moment for the U.S. Trump could have been, or could be, if he really was, he meant about going from a declining empire to a great nation. You see, there's a very big difference. Going from the declining empire to a great nation, because the U.S., in reality, this Make America Great Again, it can be like this, but it needs to give up its aspiration as a great empire because it's too much overstretched. It's only 4% of the world population, because people tend to forget 4% of the world population that wants to be the hegemon in this world. It is not possible. And now, when you are denying China, the largest country in the world, equally with India, denying them to surpass the US, which is a natural thing to do because they are like 4 times bigger than the US. Well, it's just unnatural. That means, you don't want, the pie could be bigger overall in terms of for the humanity, but they want it all. And not only they want a big share, but they want to control, everything. The world needs to be at their own image. And what is worrying is that people need to pay attention to all those, these rhetorics, manifest destiny. Manifest destiny. I used to hear that in the 70s and 80s, but now this is very dangerous. And now we are talking about, I was joking just before the show. When you are starting to talk about annexation, you see annexation Greenland, annexation Canada, annexation of the Panama Canal, annexation of Gaza for real estate, because these days it's talking about, we need to send those people in the Sinai, and this is a good real estate piece there. The last guy was actually talking about annexation, the last world leader, when he had a mustache, he was a vegetarian. And he ended up in he had a stiff arm, and he had this gesture saying, like, I send the heart to all of my friends, to all of the world, ADL is going to go after me because I'm not Elon Musk, sorry. But the problem is that is actually extremely dangerous. He needs to be careful. He's actually, he is in his allies. I don't know if people realize that what he's done with Greenland is part of Denmark. Denmark is part of the EU. You are threatening one of your closest allies to annex his territory by force. That means what? That means actually what might be happening is that the EU might get closer to China and Russia. That is a possibility. If some leaders, some countries in the EU are actually, there's Slovakia, there's Fico, there's Hungary. They're getting scared of this globalist agenda and scared by the US. And they are getting close. They're hedging their bets. They're getting closer to Russia and China. So the risk is that he might lose essential allies. And South Korea, you see, Yoon president, he did a coup, and that was backed by the US. He could not do that coup attempt. It was not backed by the US because the US de facto controls South Korean army. That's de facto. Well, guess what? That might actually backfire, and then you might have some people in South Korea say, well, you know what, we need to grow our spine, and we need to actually get back our sovereignty and democracy. And the same in Japan. Those talks are scaring his allies, and he needs to be extremely careful. Greenland, that is a red line. I think this is going to create a big problem for his allies. So I think this is a Trump flexing his muscle. Will he deliver? It's going to be a repeat, and that's always the vicious circle of elect regret, and antagonizing two parts. As Galloway says, or Frank Galloway says, those are two cheeks of the same arse. Sorry for my French.
Absolutely. Oh, okay. There's a couple of things I want to talk about that Angelo just said, but we're past the 1 hour mark. Danny, do you want to hang on? It's the beginning of your day there. Okay,
I can go a little
great.
longer, sure.
Okay. Angelo, you said one thing. You could be a great nation or a great empire, but obviously you cannot be both. I think that's a very good point to make. When they talk about make America great again, they're talking about empire. They're not talking about making America great as a nation, because if America was interested in being great as a nation, they would be investing inward. They wouldn't be talking about Greenland, Canada, Panama Canal, Russia, China. They would pull their military back home like every other nation on earth, and they begin investing in America. As a matter of fact, they could cooperate with China. Could you imagine America and China cooperating, building infrastructure across the US and then around the world? Could you imagine that? It would be, you want to talk about changing history and emblazoning your name on human history forever. That would be the way to do it. But they're incapable of it because America is run by parasites. The special interests that run America have lots of money, have lots of power, like Palmer Luckey has huge amounts of money, can get on the media and say anything he wants any time of the day that he wants. But you could see the depth or lack thereof of his mind. He has no imagination. He has no vision. He either doesn't understand how the world really works if he thinks China is actually a threat, or he's deliberately lying because his ambitions are so shallow as to only blindly pursue more money and more power. And that is not just him. That is a reflection of the entire circle of special interests that control the US versus the purpose-driven interests that run China, for example, or Russia, or even here in Thailand, as bad as the current government is and all of the political chaos, there are permanent institutions that do drive policy with purpose for the benefit of the Thai people. The Thai monarchy for decades has done this. The military has done this. I have done a video about the government pharmaceutical organization making healthcare and pharmaceuticals available to Thai people at cost, rather than running people through the ringer like they do in the US and dangling life and death over the head of dying kids. So this is not just Russia, China. There's many nations around the world that do this. If America wanted to be a great nation, that is what they would do. That is not what Trump is even pretending to do. He's telling you he's building empire. I think it was Alexander Mercouris who was just talking last 2 days about how originally it was Obama. Oh, no, it wasn't. It was CGTN. It was that interview that I sent you, Angelo. There was this great discussion. Alexander Mercouris was saying informative things as well as always, but this was CGTN, and they were talking about Trump. Is it going to make any difference that now that he's president? And they were saying Obama was the one that began talking about American exceptionalism, and now Trump is parroting that same line because ultimately both of them serve the special interests pursuing empire. What was the last thing? Oh yeah, and Angela, you're talking about Greenland and Denmark and the EU. It turns out that the US is actually the biggest threat to Europe and its sovereignty and its territorial integrity, far more so than Russia. Okay, so that's it. We're done. If there's anything else you guys want to talk about, go ahead, and then we'll work on the questions. And you don't have to stick around for that if you don't want to. But Danny, is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I mean, maybe I'll close on the point that you just made with American exceptionalism. I saw a comment in the chat. I think it was one of the last questions actually just sent about passionate negativity, and just want to say that when you have a situation where there is an empire that works in a certain kind of way, this is what we have to look at this. We have to look at how there's that saying, there are no permanent friends, there's only permanent interests. Who was that? Kissinger with the United States. But the truth is that the only thing that the United States has that's malleable in terms of its system right now of empire and of capital is narrative. That's the only thing it can really change. If it changes anything else, that means a reversal of the empire. If it changes its policy towards China, toward Russia, toward Iran, toward the Middle East, toward Latin America, anywhere, it means it has to roll back. So all it can do, actually, if it's going to maintain itself, is to try to expand. That is something we have to look at. But in truth, a lot of the reasons why it looks so chaotic right now is because there are positive developments happening in the world. We talk about them with China and what it's doing to, especially in the economic realm and in the diplomatic and the political realm, forward a multipolar world. We see Russia doing that as well. We see all of these countries in the Belt and Road Initiative. We see all of these countries joining BRICS, on and on and on. That is the positive development, which is that there is a significant and really an unstoppable movement in the world to develop a multipolar alternative to empire. That's what's positive here. That is why the U.S. empire is in such disarray, because it is no longer the only game in town. So we truthfully have to look at the Trump administration and Trump 2.0, in my estimation, as one of the which we will see many iterations of attempts to reorient the empire and stabilize the situation that I don't believe is able to be stabilized, because the empire works in a particular kind of way, and this is the trend that we are going to see up until it collapses, which it will.
Yes, and I don't remember what I was going to say. I was trying to look at a comment, a question, and I wanted to. There was something Danny just said that okay, whatever. Angelo, go ahead. Let me collect myself here. Go ahead, Angelo.
Well, don't worry. I think well, you see when actually there's lots of movements, narrative. They're sweating here and there. The US is actually spreading everywhere, creating chaos everywhere. While they're doing that, you have BRICS and the global South, China. They're building themselves. Look at the infrastructure. They're just doing the stuff. They don't need to talk, because this is like there's a lot of waste. There's waste of time, waste of money. And what China does, and I would take actually the example of Syria. I think this is an extremely good example. You could, if Russia was in a position had the same attitude as the US, it would lose. Losing in Syria would mean, that's my enemy. Well, no. In reality, what happens is that you engage. You even engage with your enemies, because that's how you can get leverage. So you see, the first one actually to recognize HTS, and they opened the embassy. There was in Russia and China. Now, the same as China and Russia, they were the first one to talk to the Taliban. It's because, hopefully somehow this government, we might be able to work with them. And it's not by antagonizing that you are going to solve anything. Actually, it's exactly the opposite. You see, China is not putting sanctions on the US because it knows that by trading with the US, by engaging, you focus on business, and somehow you have leverage upon somebody that calls you your enemy. You see, and that's the smart way. You don't want to work with me, but that's your loss. That's your loss, because I have something to bring you. And that's the attitude. It's not about, pushing around people, threatening, and so on. You want to work with me? Better. The more we work together, the more we are focusing on our common destiny. And slowly you just realize that your problems that you have are put aside. It's like the Chinese, they say, 求同存异. Look for what unites us and set aside the differences. And this is the whole philosophy of the multipolar world. So you see, Syria might join the Belt and Road Initiative, and not much will change, actually. but that's the right attitude. Why would you actually put aside, you hopefully you actually, they will adapt, even if they might be radicals. Okay, we might not like them, but let's work with them, and somehow they might change and adapt, according to the world order and world legal framework, rather than just making a pariah state. And that's how you have a leverage, and that's the whole philosophy. And it's not two blocks. People, they tend to say, well, it's BRICS against NATO. It's not. The idea is really like how we can work together, engagement, and somehow I think that the whole philosophy is about for common destiny. And this is more, there's more inspiration or manifest destiny. This is all about us at the expense of the rest. Common destiny is about, we are a whole big, this big world. How we can work together and somehow be responsible, And the funny thing is that every time the one that appropriate all those nice terms, climate change. All those nice words and so on. It's just empty stuff. Who's doing the real job is actually, China is leading the way. I would say, in terms of philosophy, at least, everything that you see about this philosophy of the multipolar world comes from China. And I think a lot of the rest of the world is seeing that actually this philosophy is a right one, because the whole idea is not white and black. China has there's actually ways, they call it the middle way, and it's much more adult. And this way you don't antagonize. And the same as Chinese style democracy. Chinese style democracy is not about finding a majority which is going to rule against the rest. It's about, you might have a majority, but the majority needs to take into account the 100%. No, it's not this mob rule. It's about how we can be responsible and have a solution that actually are going to please even the people that we don't agree with.
It's a purpose over power, purpose over profit. I remember what I was going to say now. Danny was saying that there are a lot of positive things happening around the globe, and that is true. The thing that I constantly worry about, and the only reason I do this work, is to warn people that the United States has no way of competing fairly, directly with China, with multipolarism. The fear is they still have tremendous economic, military power, political power, the ability to influence and even politically capture entire nations. They still, someone was talking about Slovakia. I don't see that. Is that going to slow down because Rubio pulled the funding? I doubt it. I highly doubt it. I think it's going to continue. I'm worried that they're going to just topple. They can't win the game, so they're going to topple the board. That's why I'm worried about talk over Panama and Greenland and building up military forces in the South China Sea, closer to China than they are to America's own shores, attacking the Belt and Road Initiative, literally arming terrorists to attack it, kill engineers, and destroy the infrastructure. This is what I worry about. And Angelo, you were talking about how China's philosophy is different, the middle path. Americans, Europeans don't know about this. And I'll just give you an example. And I'm not trying to pick on this person, but this is part of the questions. They said, yeah, China is implementing settler colonial policies just like the US in Tibet, for example. What third way is that? No, they're not. Tibet is part of China. It has been for hundreds and hundreds of years. It is recognized under international law as part of China. And if you look at the conflict there, you will see on the State Department's official website an admission that was the CIA arming militants in India, sending them over the border to stir up trouble in China, just like they do today. This is what they've done all throughout their history. So there's much more to it than what you think if you're following Western media. That is a comment that reflects the consumption of Western media, not deep research. And I don't blame people for not doing deep research. It takes time, but do the research. You will see that is a completely misplaced comment. Anything else, guys, before I start going through the questions? And then no worries if you have to go, and there's no worries at all if you want to hang in for the questions. That's quite okay as well. Anything else, Danny?
No, I think we can get to the questions.
All right. Yes. All right. So I didn't read these first. They're just the questions. So let's just go through them. Does The new wave of Ukrainian reinforcements recently sent to Kursk indicate that the Ukrainian army is no longer able to launch new offensives. Instead of trying to, they haven't been able to launch any offensives at all, period. There was the Kherson Kharkov offensive, I think, all the way back in 2022, and that did take back territory, but they lost entire brigades doing it, which is what began the manpower crisis that they're facing right now. So no, they're not able to do offensives. They're able to just drag it out for as long as possible. This was never about Ukraine winning against Russia. This was about raising the cost as high as possible for Russia until there's literally no Ukrainians left to fight. Guys, if you have anything you want to add to it, just jump in. Let's see, what is this one? Surely Trump's ego wants to bask in the glory of ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict. He would, until death, start every speech with how he ended the war. After decades, neocons can wait 4 years. No, I mean, it doesn't work that way. Of course, he has whatever desires that he has as a human being, as a politician, as wanting that feather in his cap. But at the end of the day, he has to do what the special interests that put him into office want. That is just a fact, and that's what he did during his first term. That's what he'll do in his second term. Angelo, anything?
There's no way out. As we said just before, it's a big ego. There's also the US cannot afford to lose. There's no way out. What's the solution? And we know that actually what Russia wants. And the only thing they might be able to do is the narrative. At the end of the day, I think it might be like, Russia winning, and they might spin it to say, well, at what cost? And that's, that's what they do with the Chinese economy. Whenever there's good news about China, they say at what cost? They even, I don't know if you saw, but the BBC, they say, oh, what a pity, China, it's over, the slow trains are over, you cannot enjoy the scenery like you used to. So that's better to have a 30 kilometers per hour train, and then you could.
That's true.
Why don't you, if you want to enjoy the scenery, well, take a car or take a bus, right? But there's so now you can actually make something which is amazing, the fastest train on earth and the best network. You make it, they want to make it look bad. And actually, when even things are so good, you know what they'll do? They Photoshop the picture. It's a blue sky. They're gonna make it gray, and that's embarrassing. And this is the game of the loser. You cannot be good yourself. You have to demonize the other, and this is why I think most of the viewers they might know that. But there's a budget of $1.6 billion only on building anti-China narratives. $1.6 billion, and it's every 5 years. That's $300 million per year, roughly. But this is only part, this is the tip of the iceberg. So if we were like the three of us, if we were anti-China, we actually could tap into this deep pocket fund, while on the other side, we don't get any. I mean, we don't get anything from Putin or from Citi. We're still waiting,
Yeah. I am waiting for my big UN payment any day now. But I do want to say a few things. Ukraine, our friend Mark Sloboda has said that indeed Ukraine may be able to stir up trouble along the front lines at any given point. It'll be targeted, focus, centered on any area, but it's not going to move anything. So offensive red arrow, that appears to be completely out of the question. This Kursk counterattack has been an utter failure, and they're just continuing to pour more and more money and weapons into this fight, more and more troops. I think Ukraine is getting ready to, as they've been talking about for weeks now, lower that conscription age. Donald Trump has suggested that Ukraine do this, which is a big red flag for anybody who wants the Trump administration to actually end this conflict. Well, the United States would not be asking Ukraine to lower its conscription age to fuel more fighting if it were actually serious. So, yeah, the question about wouldn't Trump want this as a feather in his cap? Indeed, I believe actually Donald Trump wants a version of an end to the conflict as a feather in his cap. he of course wants to say that he ended a conflict, but the details as to how that conflict will end with what is acceptable to the United States empire and to Donald Trump himself, because Angelo, you brought it up before, ego. That's one part of it that I think is very important, but also not being the US president that capitulated to Russia, this Cold War orientation that drives the US foreign policy establishment. It is politically unfeasible to witness a US president say, we will give XYZ concession to Russia because the conflict in Ukraine was a defeat. That is the only way that this conflict, in my opinion, actually concludes. Whether there's a pause or not, I really don't see that coming from the Russian side. But the truth is that an end to the conflict, a legitimate end that Russia sees as viable and as acceptable to its interests, is just not in the cards, which means that either Donald Trump has to make a very critical decision that I don't know if the Trump administration, and actually I have very little faith in the Trump administration in being prepared to make, which is either we've said it earlier, it's existential. There's really no gray area here. It's either accept what Russia has been able to achieve and give in to its demands, which are legitimate demands, actually not unreasonable demands, just you have to give in to them, or you keep the conflict going with whatever you have and however that's going to look. Those are the two choices, and Trump is going to have to ultimately decide, and it's likely he'll decide on the latter of continuing onward while maybe trying to save face through the achievement of some kind of settlement, instead of this bluster about a rapid end to the conflict, which would be politically unviable in the United States in terms of the foreign policy establishment right now.
Maybe I'd like to jump on this. Actually, I have the impression that one of the strategy of Donald Trump is maybe trying to do something related to gas and oil. You've seen he's been putting pressure on Saudi Arabia to actually produce more, and he's calling for more sanctions, but those won't work. And he's actually pushing. If you look at the decrees he issued, he's pushing for actually pumping more oil and gas, shale gas, opening more. Drilling more. That would actually make, if there's more oil and gas in the market, that would actually, in practice, lower the prices. That would mean actually less profit, and that would actually hurt a little bit the Russian economy. But that's a bet of, over time, hopefully, Russian economy would suffer, like the USSR actually overstretched. It overstretched in Afghanistan, and they're hoping that this could happen to Russia. And I think this is not. It's different times, and I think Russia is prepared for that. And Russia has a special partnership. We've seen, especially when it comes to China. If they lost everything that EU didn't buy, China bought it, and China is the biggest consumer of gas and oil in the world.
Yeah, and I would not count on, if I was Russia, I would not count on Saudi Arabia. But this proves the point. Trump's talking about peace. He's talking about the Biden administration caused this war, but he's still trying to win it. In the same way the people who engineered it in the first place want to win it by subordinating Russia to the US, to NATO. That was the whole problem to begin with. NATO as a loaded gun held to Russia's head all of these years, decades. And so if you're not, and what has Trump said about NATO? People are like, he wants the US out of NATO. No, he doesn't. Listen to what he said. He said, we'll leave if Europe doesn't pay more. He wants more money into NATO. He wants to expand NATO because that's what NATO and the special interest, the multi-billion-dollar multinational arms manufacturers, that's what they want NATO to do. So it's very simple. If you just filter out the political rhetoric, don't pick a side, just pick the truth. Follow it wherever it takes you, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you. I say this all the time, and you will see it. You will see it as clear as day. Here's a good one. Who's Jade Evans. I don't know if any of these people in the Trump administration, because again, it doesn't matter. I'll figure out their names eventually. Well, whoever this person is recently told Minister Yang Yi that the U.S. recognizes Taiwan as part of China. And knowing Trump, who seeks to profit out of any situation, how do you think they'll go from here? Well, look, the U.S. has always said it recognizes Taiwan as part of China, has a one China policy. It's on the State Department's official website, and that is in line with international law, which recognizes Taiwan as part of China. And that's the craziest thing. If you ask most Americans, they think Taiwan is a country. China is bullying. It's actually an island province of China that the U.S. is trying to carve off of China. If it's the other way around, we would already be in the middle of World War III. And so what is Trump going to do? He's going to pretend that he's friends with China and President Xi Jinping while they continue pumping arms into Taiwan and building up U.S. military forces around Taiwan in the Philippines, Japan, Guam, South Korea, until something gives. Because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to provoke a war with China sooner than later, because later China will beat the U.S. No question. Let's see. Well, you are absolutely accurate about Palmer. Despite this, why can't the U.S. pivot hard to purpose over profit, ban cost-plus contracts in the Pentagon, and invest in lowering costs of living? It's the same reason why a dog infested with parasites cannot be healthy, because it's infested with parasites. America's industry, financial institutions, and government is utterly infested with parasites that have not only sucked the blood from the American people, they've also rewired their brains to accept these parasites, even cheer on the parasites. Danny, you laughed.
Yeah.
What is?
Well, I want to make a comment about this, because in relation to what you were just saying about Taiwan too, the previous question, Marco Rubio also had a conversation. I think they said J.D. Vance there, but yeah, Marco Rubio also had a conversation with his counterpart Wang Yi and said the same thing, that Taiwan is part of China. It recognizes the one China principle. They have to say that. Every U.S. administration, it is the key tenet of normalization between the U.S. and China. The minute the United States says this verbally, ties between the United States and China are severed. That's the reality. China says this publicly. They say that this is a tenet of normalization. This is what binds the ties of the U.S. and China. But legally, that's actually what it is. If you read the joint communiques, there's 3 of them. So there's that. But this is in direct relation to this other question. Well, why can't the United States just do the opposite of what it is doing? Why can't it divest from the military-industrial complex and invest in people's needs? Well, you have people like Marco Rubio, who are funded by the biggest of corporations, whose entire purpose, whether they occupy the Senate or whether they are now in the State Department, is to champion their interests. And they cannot do that openly, so they have to put on a particular kind of face while they actually pursue the policy that is the true agenda of their funders and donors and backers, which is to contain China. Marco Rubio, on the one hand, says one China policy is U.S. policy. On the other, he goes to the Quad and talks about how big of a threat the Indo-Pacific is under, ambiguously. But in his hearing to confirm his nomination as the Secretary of State, he said China is the biggest threat to the United States. So even rhetorically, this is what these people believe in. This is who rules the United States. Truthfully, someone like Marco Rubio and even Donald Trump, they're just managers of those donors, those corporations, those militarists who see China as an existential threat to their overall empire and their power projection and their capacity to continue what they do, which is accumulate massive profits at the expense of everyone else. And that includes people in the United States. That includes ordinary people, working people. These corporations, their entire business model is hinged upon making as much money as possible and lowering the cost of everything impossible, including labor, in order to do that. And we just happen to be in a period where, to move the needle, this is why you don't have the Trump administration saying we're going to increase the minimum wage, we're going to crack down on companies, we're going to actually ensure that people have health care. You don't have that, because to do that means you have to pay money. You have to actually invest in something. You actually have to give capital into people's needs. Well, every single special interest, as you call them, Brian, the donors, the corporations, every cent paid outward is seen as a problem. And I'm not surprised by that, given that the entirety of the US economy, these corporations, these monopolies that dominate it, from the financial sector to the retail sector, service, wherever sector you're looking at, they're all in massive amounts of debt. They're all they are all living off of the very Wall Street lenders, which have created this problem. They simply will not budge, because if they do, they're going to have to figure out a kind of business model that allows that. Well, one that requires that someone like Jeff Bezos makes billions and billions of dollars off of nothing. Well, that business model simply cannot sustain lowering the cost of living for everybody, because that means you have to eat into a potential profitable opportunity. The LA fires, look at that. Prices, rent, housing prices went through the roof because the fire industry, finance, insurance, and real estate saw that as a big opportunity. They're like, let's make this money. People are going to be desperate. We want to make more money off of this. That is the economic model that the United States lives off of right now. And until that is changed, nothing in relation to foreign policy regarding China, Russia, etc., and nothing in relation to domestic policy is going to change dramatically, regardless of whether Trump or anybody else speaks to any legitimate problems that may be caused by this system.
That's a great point, Danny. It's not just that China is this growing power and a rival. It's the fact that they are presenting an alternative, a purpose-driven alternative that the Western system cannot continue existing side by side with. They cannot. If you see tech, and this is going to accelerate as technology continues advancing, and it's not linear, it is exponential. Everything is going to get cheaper and more accessible. Everything, healthcare, the US, the monopolies create artificial scarcity. Technology is going to reduce scarcity. Real technology, real advancement at a normal pace will eliminate scarcity. China is eliminating scarcity. And so this is a problem for them. Their rackets will literally disappear if they don't stop China. This people have to understand this. There is no real threat from China to the American people. The real threat to the American people who have a cost of living crisis, who can't pay for healthcare, who can't buy and own a house like their parents or grandparents did. Their real enemy are the billionaires parasitically feeding off of them. People like Palmer Luckey, everyone in the military industrial complex, big pharma, big ag, the entertainment industry, all of them who are sending you through the ringer and getting every penny out of you. Very important to understand that. A very good point. This person has asked a lot of questions. Why haven't I had Michael Hudson, famous economist Michael Hudson? Well, Danny Haiphong actually does really great interviews. That is his channel. He does interviews. I do not really do. This is supposed to be like a casual conversation between the three of us. I don't feel that I do interviews very well. Danny has a bigger platform. If you want to watch Mr. Hudson, please go to Danny. You've had him on, haven't you?
Yeah. Yes. I actually was considering he's been writing some really interesting articles recently. I might have him on soon. So I'll reach out to him. It's been a really busy time.
All of Danny's contact information, all of the places you can find his work is already in the video description below. So check that out if you do want to see interviews like that. This is that's not a question, but it's a good point. I reported to DeepSeek that the chatbot peddles U.S. State Department narratives on Xinjiang. And actually ChatGPT does too, but that's because there is just a mass of propaganda in English language. And when the AI goes through it, to them, that is the reality, because there's just such a bulk of lies. Now, I did something interesting. I was actually debating ChatGPT about Xinjiang, and I actually got it to admit that there is no evidence of any sort of genocide, and that's almost certainly being made up by the West. So if you know how to ask the right questions, AI will tell you the actual answer. The problem is people don't know. Like people were asking Google, is there a video of Anduril's recent cruise missile flying, and the AI told them, yes, there was. They didn't click on it and watch it. It just said that there was, because somewhere said that on the internet said that it was, but it's not true. So you've got to double check. You got to know the right questions to ask. AI is just another tool. It's only as good or as dangerous as you make it in your own hands. Let's see. I think AI is going to become a huge issue. People need to get ahead of the curve there. Let's see. Guys, again, I'm going to go through all these questions. There's no obligation at all because we're getting up to 2 hours. So don't worry if there's something else you have to do. And I appreciate everyone hanging in there. You're too interested in moving to Greenland. It's time to stake out your new home on virgin territory. The American dream lives again in Greenland. Okay. This is obviously they're being sarcastic and joking. But just think of how insane it is to have a U.S. president talking about annexing not just someone else's territory, but an ally's territory. Just think about how insane that is. And as Angelo pointed out when we talked about this previous live stream, the U.S. government has been insidiously funding and building up an independence movement in Greenland all along. They do to their allies what they've done to their enemies. They are the greatest danger to national sovereignty, peace, stability around the globe. And then through their propaganda, they convince you everyone else is.
But Brian, there's even worse than that. If you really look into the funding of the NGOs, all the climate change NGOs, animal protection, human right protection, they've been pouring into Greenland. And actually, we all know that on the back of those, who's actually supporting those NGOs? It's always like a U.S. Western government, and they've done everything just to make sure that Greenland would put a moratorium into drilling, exploring the natural resources, because we all know they have trillions of dollars of natural resources. There's lots of gas over there. There's lots of minerals, rare earth, and now Trump, he knows that they've been, and Greenland lives out of welfare coming from Denmark. So Denmark pays every year $500 million to have Greenland to be sustainable. So you kept that place extremely poor, living out of subsidies, and now you're actually saying, well, maybe we should annex it, and then we are going to drill. You see, so when it's about containing, and they do the same for Africa, we need to contain them. Don't develop, don't build up your infrastructure, because this is for you preserve the nature, for CO2 and so on. And now when you have access to them, you can do the looting. Oh, then we lift everything. Oh, why don't we use, we drill there?
Yes. And people need to look into these issues. Look behind the headlines and the rhetoric. There's always more to the story. I see people celebrating. I think Trump withdrew from the World Health Organization. Surely the reason he's doing that is because Big Pharma somehow benefits from it. He transferred billions of dollars to them unconditionally during the pandemic. And people kind of forget that. They're always talking about Biden and the pandemic, but it was Trump's Operation Warp Speed. He got it started in a big way. Unbelievable. I mean, the memory, goldfish memory. How can American citizens boycott the corporations that are behind U.S. foreign policies? Go to the Brookings Institution's website, Rand Corporation, CSIS. They all have lists of the corporations that are funding the policy work that they do that eventually ends up U.S. policy, regardless of who's in office. And you start boycotting them. Now, you don't have to do all of it overnight. It's not going to change anything overnight. And this alone is not going to change anything, but it is a contributing factor. Stop investing in unipolarism. Start investing in multipolarism. You can invest locally, local businesses. You can, if you're going to buy a phone, you have a choice between Apple and Huawei. Buy Huawei. Why are you going to give your money to U.S. corporations that are driving policy you disagree with? So vote with your wallet. And if you're poor and you have no choice and you have to buy these things, that's fine. Think of ways you can become more self-sufficient. I know people personally doing this in the U.S., who are not middle class or rich or anything like that. They're able to do this. I've been doing it over many years. Here in Thailand, it's obviously a lot easier. In Asia, it's a lot easier. It's a no-brainer, really. But it's something that can be done, and it is something more effective than voting, I would say.
Yeah, and I would say also that something like this needs to happen on a massive scale, coordinated, organized by people, because truthfully, in order to even exist in the United States, there's absolutely no way to avoid on an individual level. I think people should do what they can, and I think people do this with scaling back with whatever corporations, various ways of individual choices that we make financially that end up going to the war machine. I think all that should be done, but it has to be massively coordinated, organized as part of this larger drive to end this foreign policy regime, which says that war and empire is the order of the day. And it can be done. I mean, a boycott, even though it wasn't the only thing. There was an armed struggle. There was a political movement, let's say in South Africa and globally, to end apartheid in South Africa. But a boycott was actually a big part of that. So it can be a huge part of weakening, centers of power, which are finding themselves more and more illegitimate to the people they claim to represent. So I agree with you, Brian. I think it needs to be taken seriously, and I hope more and more people will collectively use this tool as a way to bring the empire back to reality, and that reality is that we don't need this anymore. We never really did, but really the entire world doesn't need it and can't afford it anymore.
Absolutely. And India, its independence from the British Empire, they began becoming self-sufficient. Russia, how has it become independent from a U.S. controlled unipolar world order? By becoming self-sufficient economically, industrially, militarily. Same goes for China. So that really is the key to all power here on Earth. And so that is the key to going towards it. You have to have purpose over profit and power, boycott. There's a whole array of tools that you have to use together. No single one is going to do it on its own. How about this one? How long will Gaza ceasefire last? I don't know. Nobody knows. What I will tell you is it's only inevitable that it begins again, because the root cause hasn't been resolved. The root cause is U.S. foreign policy, using Israel as a proxy, installing a regime into power that is interested in perpetual warfare, tormenting the Palestinian people and all nations across the region. If you do not solve that problem, you're not going to solve the conflict. This, among many other conflicts that are driven by this. If you have anything you want to say, just jump in while I'm looking for the next.
I think the ceasefire is important. It is not permanent. We're actually about to head into the phase, which the phase 2 of it, which will have to do with military to military, or exchanging, IDF prisoners of war. That will be very difficult for Israel to stomach, because I think it shows what a lot of people have been seeing, which is that their capacity to fight and to wage a long war of attrition for expansion and mass death and whatever else objectives they have is actually impossible to win. Like it's actually impossible to achieve and accomplish. It hasn't actually ever really been done in the modern era. You could argue the United States was able to do it pre-United States with the colonization of North America, but in the modern era, it's very difficult to achieve. And this phase 2, which will require blatant and open admission that Israel faced a lot of troubles in trying to achieve this goal, it's going to be hard to stomach. And I don't know if even Israel will get close to that phase 2 of this so-called ceasefire without lashing out and creating, which is what they always do. They're trying to every day. You can almost see it every other day. They're trying to create conditions to say, oh, Hamas is doing this. This is being breached, blah, blah, blah. And they're just trying to figure out, is there a scenario that will allow them to go all in. I believe right now the only thing holding Israel back is the fact that the Trump administration doesn't want to see this absolute total carnage, which is what we were seeing under Biden, happen right now. But once there's time and space and this deal looks like something that Trump, as we said earlier, a feather in the cap, hey, I did this, and then Trump can say this isn't our war, it can potentially resume. And let's be honest, the United States will continue to back it because Trump has already signaled that Israel will get what it wants militarily. It's the exception to the foreign aid cancellation. We have to remember that not even this cosmetic foreign aid cancellation can put Israel into that. No, that Israel stays in it.
And remember, the ultimate goal here is not to exterminate Palestine. Palestine is always the pretext used, a catalyst for conflict across the region. We just watched them use Hamas as a catalyst to eliminate Syria, and they succeeded. The next goal is Iran, almost certainly. Trump is saying it. Everyone he picked in his cabinet, they're all for war with Iran, regime change with Iran. I've heard people talking about, oh, he's got, maybe he'll do a deal instead of war against. How many times do we have to go through this and watch? The U.S. has to pretend that it's trying to make a deal so that when they inevitably go for regime change, it looks like they had to do it reluctantly. It literally says that in the policy papers that they've had floating around publicly for years and years. Anybody could read it. That is the plan. That is literally the signed and dated plan that they have. And so that's where this is all headed ultimately. Why would the American people go out of their way to help the world in dismantling the American empire against its own interests? Why would they go against the status quo that I guess they meant that benefits them? Because it doesn't benefit the American people. There's nothing about what the U.S. is doing around the world that benefits American people in even the slightest way. We were just talking about how if you're in China, if you're a Chinese person, you have access to the best infrastructure on earth. You have better and better healthcare. You have healthcare that is affordable, that you could actually get access to if you're sick. You have better education. You have an educational system pumping out millions more designers and engineers than the U.S. So how is this global order benefiting the U.S., the average American? Danny, you live in the United States. I'm from America. When I went overseas to Japan, my mind was blown because I thought the rest of the world was an open sewer and America was the shining city on the hill. And it turned out it's kind of almost the other way around.
Yeah, well, they need a Putin. They need a Putin that comes. Remember what when Yeltsin. Under Yeltsin, they were looting the whole country. It was run by oligarch. Well, Putin came over and he said, I'm not going to go after the wealth you did, by looting the country, but I want you out of politics. So that's what Russia did. China did the same. You had Jack Ma at some point. He wanted to actually meddle into politics. He wanted actually to bypass some laws. He wanted to do money creation. When you start to create money, this is the role of the state. He tried to do things that it was not allowed. China said, you stay where you are. Don't even think about going to politics and doing any influence. And they're very serious about this. Well, that's the difference. That's the difference. What I think one of the possibilities for the US to get out of this mentality of imperialism is actually re-empower yourself. In the US, people, they need to get the power to themselves. I mean, to have a real it means getting a real democracy, meaning, all the money and into politics, all those, this democracy, which is of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. And that's just the only solution. And in order to do that, you need somebody like Messiah, like Putin. Putin changed everything, and that's what they hate. They hate that. They'd rather be with countries, dealing with countries where you have the oligarch. Because the idea of the oligarchs, they get together and they're like, you know what? Let's get this whole pie all to us, and let's make sure that we turn all population to slave labor. We zombify them. We turn them into zombies. We give them Netflix, fentanyl, alcohol, porn, and we divide them. That's the key thing. We divide them, and we pretend that we're fighting each other, but at the end of the day, they sleep together. They are the same. They are the same elites. They want to control people, and ultimately, I think it's just a class struggle. We need to keep at the level of class struggle. It's the 1% against the 99%, and people need to get out of this mentality of divisions, because I see, black or white, both poor, they're fighting each other. I'm like, how stupid are you? Ultimately, you are exactly the same, struggling over the same thing, and your enemy is laughing at you. And they did those divisions over and over identity, over conservative, and so on. And the MAGA, when you look at the MAGA, what is driving them is the sickness of, they're completely sick about this woke ideology, which I agree. It went way too far, but they don't realize that this is the game. Why do you think Zuckerberg is switching to completely woke and now he's backing completely Trump? Well, they're opportunistic. Those are tools. Disneyland was completely woke. Well, you know what? They're going to change. They go along. But that's part of those divisions. It's chaos. It's a chaos strategy, and it's a divide and control. And what the Americans need to do, I think, if we want to end up imperialist, it's about internally making the changes. And the problem is that I believe it's a bit of a stretch, but I believe those guys that will never relinquish of power, ultimately, they need to get to a threshold of pain that is going to be armed struggle. And that's the only way. But they keep them at the level of just bearable. You're in a survival mode, and you're not going to die for changing your life. So it's just bearable, and you turn them into zombies. That's what they are. That's what you become.
And then you blame China for all the addictions and distractions.
Yeah, and just quickly on because it's a very good point, Angelo. Because what's so interesting is that what you just described it's completely divorced from actual life. Like real life is, there are people in the United States who are suffering, whether they're part of certain groups or just a general suffering. That is, all of it is class-based, regardless of whether it looks, whether it's racial, whether it's whatever. It's all class-based because it's all about keeping ordinary people in their place. But yet this whole culture war versus identity politics completely divorces the actual. It is completely divorced from the actual reality that people are living in. And then what it does is it creates a whole new way of spinning the duopoly, which is really just a political arm of the oligarchs that you were talking about, Angelo. It's all about just spinning. Okay, well, the so-called left, really neoliberals, liberals, whatever you want to call them, they're for identity politics. Well, the right, they're culture warriors. They're anti-woke. It's all of it is just about keeping us fixated on a particular narrative so that business as usual continues. That's really what it has become, despite the fact that both of them, both identity politics and both culture war, whatever we want to call it, anti-woke, they come from legitimate problems. One, the weaponization of identity politics against masses of people done by mainly the Democrats, but really just elites of a particular stripe. The culture war, the anti-woke, that's where that stems from. But identity politics comes from legitimate issues too. It's not as if Black people in the United States live well. It's not as if there aren't massive divisions in U.S. society that are material in nature. Come on, let's just look at the wages of the average migrant worker in the United States versus the person who isn't a migrant worker. And you'll see both of them are low, but the lower one is going to be the Salvadoran, Mexican, whoever they are, picking your grapes or picking your strawberries, like that, be much lower. So those are real problems. But the solution to those problems isn't the weaponization of identity politics to say, well, okay, everything is good as long as Obama is president. No, we have to have actually real material solutions to these problems that actually address things, that's where identity politics gets weaponized by elites, because they are taking advantage of legitimate problems that people were seeing, and then they turn them into something completely different. They divorce it from the class context, and then they put it into a framing that legitimizes their rule and bamboozles everyone else into this really farcical debate that I can't even engage in it anymore, and I'll just stop there because I just can't engage it. It's just like a waste of time, because everyone's on their team and camp, and they don't want to pay attention to especially the things that we've been talking about today.
Because it taps into something extremely emotional, and I've talked about this endlessly, whether it's about Hamas, or even people in the comment section saying, Brian, how come you keep saying America is dangerous? America is done. Israel is done. They're not done. They just rolled over Syria. Did people see that? They're still dangerous. They're still powerful. You have to look at the truth no matter what. You cannot allow emotions to cloud your judgment, cloud your ability to do analysis, to draw correct conclusions. Everyone becomes emotional. It's not that I'm telling you don't have emotions. It actually kind of ties into this comment. They're admitting that it's emotional, and it's depressing, and it is depressing. You have to confront that. It is a problem, and a problem is supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. And if you're going to ignore the problem so you can feel comfortable, you're never going to solve it. So it's good that people admit that this makes them feel uncomfortable. They're admitting that this is emotional, and then they can go about confronting the problem, seeing through everything that is making us emotional, trying to distract us, and go to the root of the problem. We only have two questions left. Here we go. This one's great. Using concepts like Empire of Liberty, the Monero Doctrine, Manifest Destiny, Exceptionalism, McKinley's expansionism. Do you think that MAGA is just populist reframing of the Project for New American Century? Yes, absolutely. It's neocon. It's the neocon agenda with MAGA branding, just like it was under Biden, whatever his branding was, and Obama, hope and change. And if you listen carefully, the core principles are exactly the same. Exceptionalism, American exceptionalism, American leadership, which is just a euphemism for empire. And the last one, does the EU, US have 200,000 troops? They have tens of thousands of troops, plenty of weapons, air power, that they could create a problem in Ukraine for Russia. That is a fact. People have to face that reality. And this is why Russia is doing what it is doing, carefully, cautiously, incrementally. This is why they've avoided provocations. This is why they do things the way they do, because they are not going to underestimate the collective West. Many people underestimated the U.S. and its ability to roll over Syria, and we see how that turned out. That was a warning to everyone, a wake-up call that the U.S. is still extremely dangerous, and people have to understand that and act accordingly. Russia, I think, understands that. China understands that. And that is it. That is the last question. I want to thank you both for taking over 2 hours out of your time to join me. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. I know there were a lot of other questions, but if I just kept answering, we would never finish. So I want to thank everyone who tuned in. Please check the video description below to find and follow Danny Haiphong, also Angelo, who I have on every time we do these discussions, as well as other places you can find and follow my work. And again, thank you guys, both of you, for joining me. And until next time, bye for now.